of ESF Connected, the first in a series that will highlight the New York State Center for Sustainable Materials Management. Today, we will be hearing about the sustainability efforts at ESF, as well as an overview of the goals for the center. Our host today is Kate Walker, ESF Project Director for the Center for Sustainable Materials Management. Enjoy the show. ESF Connected starts now.
Talking all about sustainability. Before we get started today from Moon Library, I would like to note that we are way more than 6 feet apart today, being socially distanced and safe. So today we're going to be talking a lot about sustainability, and first we'll be talking about ESF's path to zero waste. And we're really excited to do that. Next, we're going to be talking about a new initiative, which is funded and partnered with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and is called the New York State Center for Sustainable Materials Management. I'll be talking a little bit about that with Mark Lichtenstein, who's here, our Executive Operating Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer, and the Chief of Staff here at ESF. Mark, I think you have a lot of titles. Welcome, and we're so excited to be talking with you today. Mark, go ahead.
Great, thank you, Kate. And let me first welcome you. What are you? Is this like your third week?
Yep, third week. So
Indoctrination by
yes,
fire.
I'm a full-on expert now on ESF.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, welcome, fellow alumni. I'm a grad of ESF, 1985, and I really do want to leave most of the time for Kate to talk about the center, but we thought it important to give you a little background first on what we're talking about here when we talk about sustainable materials management. And I want to give a shout out to Sue Fassler. Sue is also an alumna, and she is our sustainable facilities manager, and she helped a lot with putting this together, really did a lion's share of a lot of this, and I'm sure she's watching somewhere. So hello, Sue. Hope you're doing good. All right, so what you'll see on the slide is the 5 things we want to accomplish today. First of all, what are we talking about when we talk about sustainable materials management? Then we want to zero in on what we're trying to do here at the college related to zero waste, and I'm going to talk about what we mean by zero waste. And then we'll turn it back over to Kate, who's going to dive into the center. That's really the bulk of what we want to do here. This is my favorite topic. It's really the area that I cut my teeth on, waste management, running a solid waste system at a county level, and then being involved on national efforts to promote recycling. And I'm really happy to be talking about it today, and I'm very happy to be sharing some of the news of what we've done here at the college, again, under Sue's leadership. So let's talk about SMM, Sustainable Materials Management. Let me say this first, that I hope neither one of us uses the term waste very much in the rest of the presentation today. There'll be a few times that we talk about it, particularly those of you that have gone to this college, and I'm gonna give you a challenge question right now. We believe, many of us in the zero waste movement and the sustainable materials management believe that nature does not recognize the concept of waste. So think about that for a minute. Nature does not recognize the concept of waste. What in nature produces waste? So that's an open-ended question. I'm interested in you putting stuff in the chat box that Kate is monitoring. It is really a human construct, this idea of waste, and it's really something that we have created, whereas we have something we no longer need to use, and we throw it into this place called away, which does not exist anywhere. So sustainable materials management is really about that. It's about how do we sustainably manage these materials. And let me first go to a little bit about, like, one of the only times I am going to use the term waste. Why are we talking about this? First of all, I want to point you, and maybe you can put this in the chat, the link to this report that I was involved in, Sue was involved in, others from the college. It's called ZCAP, or American Zero Carbon Action Plan. We did this over the summer, and it's intended to inform the current administration in Washington about how to reach zero carbon by the year 2050. We did a whole chapter on sustainable materials management. So greenhouse gas emissions was a key part of that chapter. So I don't want to dive too deep in that right now because again, I want to give Kate time to talk about the center. So go to look at the ZCAP report, because it totally gets into this in great detail on not only the carbon emissions from our wasting industries and facilities like landfills, for instance, but also the savings that we can get in carbon through recycling or even better waste reduction. So go take a look at ZCAP. It's in the chat function of this presentation. What does waste tell us about our culture? That's the other thing. I think you probably all are aware that we are actually one of the largest wasting countries in the world. What does that say about us? And I'll leave that all up to you to define. But the impact on environmental justice is where I really want to go here, because what it says to me, if you look at where our facilities are, for the most part, landfills, waste energy facilities, even recycling facilities, and people think recycling is the panacea, and I've been in recycling pretty much my whole adult life. It is a solution, it is not the solution, and even recycling facilities are in communities that are impacted negatively by some of those facilities, recycling facilities. So there's a huge social equity and social justice piece here with waste and materials management, and it's something we're concerned about here. It's something the center is concerned about, and it's something that that the college is concerned about. I talked a little bit about the barometer of cultural and expectations. Let me just dive into the expectations piece a little bit. We do as a society and as individuals, and I'm just as guilty as the next person, we love things to be convenient. Our current waste management, materials management scheme is based on convenience. I call it the behavior of convenience. We feed into the behavior of convenience. And it's something we all need to be aware of. Our lives are hectic, particularly this last year has been crazy. I'm not suggesting that we make things more difficult necessarily, but I do suggest we think about this issue of convenience and how can we design systems and sustainable materials management in a way that addresses this issue of behavior of convenience. In the United States, you may have seen figures, they're all over the place, but the average person creates about 4.51 pounds of waste per day, and that fluctuates on a year-by-year basis. We produce a lot of it. This is a chart that's used, a graph that's used quite a bit, and I'm not going to dive into it too deep, but what I want to show you, really what I want you to zero in on is kind of the flat lining at the top. I'm colorblind. I think that top color is it blue? So what's the third color down then?
Aqua.
Ah, okay, aqua. So, all right, so the darker blue, pretty much flatlined. That's the recycling rate. We have not been doing a good job with recycling for decades, This is, by the way, one of the reasons we have the center, so I'm not going to steal Kate's thunder on this, but the DEC recognizes this statewide. We're going to talk more about that. We really appreciate the DEC support for the center. Depending on how you cut this, we're at 30, 34, 32% recycling rate in this country, fluctuates up and down a little bit. It's deplorable, and it hasn't grown. You can see that chart. We cannot rest on our laurels with this. It is a problem. Recycling plays a role, don't get me wrong, but this alone tells us, and this is up to 2017, but we actually have seen the numbers dip a little bit since then. So we're not doing a great job with the stagnant recycling rate in this country. I am not going to really talk about this. We included it in the presentation just so you have it. It gives you an idea of where emissions come from in this country. The materials management sector crosses all of these sectors that are listed below this pie graph. It is a sector that cuts across just about every industry sector, so I'm using this word sector twice. Let's talk about it as a materials management industry, if you will. But when you look at it as an entire industry cutting across all these sectors, and again, if you look at the ZCAP report, you'll see there's substantial carbon impacts, climate change impacts related to it. We always, in our business, talk about the hierarchy, the solid waste hierarchy. And again, this is for your information. I don't plan on reading all of this, but at the top is reducing. We've heard the 3 R's before, but now we've got multiple R's: reduce, rethink, redesign. Refuse is the first one, reuse, recycling. So they're all right there at the top. We call this the upstream approach. So think about that for a minute. Most of our efforts and most of the attention we give, say with recycling, and again, we still have to recycle, is downstream. It's after the materials have been created And it's when they're already in the management systems to manage governments, private sector. What we really want to do is we want to focus more on these upstream solutions that are at the top of this upside down pyramid. So let's focus on that as we're thinking through some of these things today, and the center is going to be focusing on this hierarchy as well, this upside down hierarchy. All right, so you have to have a definition of anything you're talking about, so here it is. So you can take a look at that. I'm not going to read it. You can look at it. This is what Sustainable Materials Management, or SMM, is, kind of a recognized definition, but this is what it really is. It is, and this is cliched, I know, we talk about systems, we talk about integration. This college certainly focuses on that in a lot of different areas, but it is a complete systemic look at this system from top to bottom and understanding how the materials flow and what we can do about it. That's not what the solid waste management system currently does in this country, or for that matter in the world. SMM is different than solid waste management. It brings in issues like economic development and job creation and so on. The other thing is it's about life cycle analysis. It's the life cycle of products from what we call cradle to grave, but all the way through the circle, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's about the highest and best use of materials, so life cycle is about that. So in Syracuse, New York, we have to look at what is the highest and best use of the plastic bottle that we collect here for recycling, here in central New York. It's about doing our best to keep materials local once they've been collected. We have markets around the world we do need to ship to, but generally speaking, how do we create markets local? That's another reason the center was created, is how do we do recycling market development in New York State so we can keep materials local? That's what highest and best use means. It's about a productive system that we redefine, and it's about attacking those social equity issues I talked about before. That's the cultural realignment part of this. I also want to mention here that it's about what I call disassociation, and some of my colleagues refer to it as disassociation. I asked the question of people, I asked the question to you, how many people do you think know where the water goes when it goes down their drain in their sink? The whole process. Where does it go? How is it managed? Probably not an awful lot of people. I asked the same question about materials and waste. Where do people think it goes when they put it at the curb? Probably a lot of people don't know. It goes away. Again, no such place as away. So disassociation is happening. We are disassociating from when we make a decision to do something with the water or the waste. What we're trying to do with SMM is to reassociate, so people understand the impacts. They understand what happens when they make their decisions. They understand what happens when they wish cycle, which is also bad. What does that mean? You put something in the recycling bin because you're not sure if it should or not, so you put it in there. Many times those items are not recyclable and cause problems. That's a form of disassociation as well, so we're attempting to attack that as well. So I just want to finish up with a few slides here on SMM. This is what we have now for what we call our linear economy. SMM is about the circular economy. Here's another very complex graphic produced by our partner, the Post-Landfill Action Network, that again talks about the consumptive economy, again based on our linear economy. A circular economy, I don't have a chart on this here, but a circular economy is one where the materials go back in to feed the economy. Say you're deconstructing houses in the city of Syracuse and the materials go back into new houses in the city of Syracuse. So it's an upcycling kind of scenario. This is what we're promoting through our efforts. All right, so let me talk about what's happening here at ESF. We are on the path to zero waste. Sue Fassler is leading this effort for us equally with our custodial staff, our ground staff, our trade staff, and frankly, every other employee at this college. These are the people on the front lines and they understand better, and they're doing a great job here. So first, let's talk about what we define as zero waste. In today's world, there probably is no reality to the fact that there's zero waste, the human construct of waste. The definition comes from the Zero Waste International Alliance, and it's the definition we are trying to achieve, which is a 90% diversion of the current material stream we have right now from landfills and waste-to-energy facilities. So again, the goal, it's an aspirational goal, 90% diversion from landfills and waste-to-energy facilities. You may hear some people say zero waste to landfill. That is not zero waste because waste to energy facilities are still part of that equation. So there's some nuances here. So that's our goal, and we're using the 2018-2019 period for the baseline. So there's the goal. That's, by the way, one of our waste audits from our students there. And here's our baseline. So again, you saw the national averages. We're at the national average. That's not good for a college of the environment. So we shouldn't be satisfied with this, and nor were we. So we did some things. And again, our teams have been great about this. So we looked at our bins. That's a basic thing. You want to have consistency. I'll show you some pictures in a minute, and I've got a little show and tell here. We purchased new bins externally, internally. Here's a list. But this little thing, I think, is the key to the success. This is all that we have in our offices for our trash component. And at first, some people were skeptical, but this was absolutely essential, and everybody seems to be doing just fine with these. I know I am, and it really forces you to think about the materials that you're throwing away. So that was key. We also changed our external hauling contract to a company that's been extremely helpful with this effort. These are some of the bins. Also, they've helped to beautify the campus. They're much easier to use. I can't remember, Sue could tell us how many, maybe she could put it in the chat, how many different types of bins we had across campus before we standardized to these. So hint, hint, Sue, if you're listening, put it in the chat box. Here's where we are today in 1 year, and this is this is pre-pandemic, because last year is not a fair year because there wasn't a lot of materials created on campus. So this is before the pandemic hit. So we're well on our way. Low-hanging fruit, composting, food waste composting, and so on. We did a lot of things like that. Now we're getting to the more difficult things. We are banning single-use plastics. Our vending machines have already taken the plastic water bottles out and put in aluminum versions of that, much more recyclable material, less impact on the environment. So we're well on our way. Give you one more slide on this. There's some examples of the reductions in weight that we've realized. So we're feeling pretty good about it, but we've got a lot more work to do. All right, let's get to the center. I'll give a little background first. So I mentioned the DEC. That's our New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They are our sponsor. We worked with them to develop this grant, which we're going to go through. And it's a pretty substantial endeavor. And this started with the state recognizing that we have a recycling markets challenge. So how can we help communities with the fact that China has shut off the United States from sending materials there, which frankly I don't blame them. We were sending them garbage. And it also creates an opportunity for us to create markets here, which I said earlier. But that was the main impetus for this. How can we help our communities with recycling markets? But again, we put together a whole portfolio of ideas, which Kate's going to talk about, with a heavy load on those upstream items that I talked about earlier. And before I turn it over to Kate, here's kind of the high-level things that we've done. We actually have a 10-year MOU with the DEC, 5 years funded, and it's almost $6 million we're funded with a great commitment for us both as partners, the DEC and ESF, to continue to work for additional funding. We're beginning actually our second year soon of the whole project. It was formally announced last September. It took a while to get everything signed. And it's the first of its kind in the U.S. And let me clarify. There is a Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. There are other centers at other states. But the uniqueness here is the state itself funding at this level, and Kate's going to go through some other examples, is unique. And basing these centers, there's others that Kate will talk about, at universities is also unique. And the big thing that makes it unique is its sustainable materials management. It's not just focused on one thing like recycling. The other thing is Syracuse University is one of our core partners on this, and Kate's going to talk a little bit about that. So with that, Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you to dive a little deeper into the center.
Great, thank you, Mark. Before I dive into the center, I do want to take a couple of minutes and just update on the chat and some conversations that are going on here, and also give major kudos to Sue for bringing me up to speed so quickly in 3 weeks that I've been here, but also, Mark, to you and the ESF team. I had my first opportunity this morning, to sit with the sustainability team, and having worked in this realm, in this field with other universities that are large, it's amazing the amount of work that has been done up to this point. So kudos to you guys, and I'm so excited to be part of the team. Sue has chimed in that there were 28 types of trash and recycling bins in Ilk Hall. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah,
Ilk?
yeah.
Awesome. And 18 at the Gateway Center. So do the math there. It clearly was not standardized, and we know critical to sustainability, making sure that we had that messaging and that visual, those visual materials standardized across the university was critical. So thank you, Sue, for chiming in there. So back to the center, as Mark said, and again, it so resonates, and I'm so excited to hear. I'll try not to use the word waste too much. I have been educating folks across the state, and let me tell you, the one that I really can't stand is the G word, which is, I won't say it here. Do you want to say it?
The G word.
Garbage.
Oh, garbage,
I mean,
right?
we
Yeah,
won't
absolutely,
even, we
right,
didn't,
right.
we didn't
See,
even
it's
have
out
to
of my
go
vernacular.
there. We didn't
Yeah,
even have to go
completely,
there.
yeah.
But so when we look at, and as Mark explained that hierarchy, and many of the folks that are watching today are aware of that hierarchy, what the center did and what Mark did with this draft of the contract and moving through with the state, recognizing that they started with having a concern of recycling markets and recognizing that recycling levels where they were between 30 and 35% of materials being recycled was just not going to get us to where we needed to go in the state. And in the last couple of years, having progressive climate legislation and recognizing that waste was a huge piece of this, and making sure that we were diverting waste, but also really paying attention to the top of that hierarchy. So when you look at the tasks as defined in the center, Mark was able to add, and the team add, all of those pieces when we think about market development and expanding something called extender producer responsibility. So if you see up on your slide, you can see the 6 tasks that were outlined, and the center will be completing. And as Mark noted, this is not going to be done alone. This is a huge effort, and we have incredible partners at the state, but we'll also be relying, and I'll talk a little bit about them at the end of the slide, about our university partners and the research that's happening across the state. But this is going to be a problem that has to be across the board. So when we're talking about the economics of recycling and waste minimization, working with markets and in the private sector, we're going to have to form a lot of partnerships, and so many of them are already established. So thanks to the expertise of Mark leading the team and understanding SMM, and also all of those folks that have been working in this field for so many years, we're going to be in great shape. So as we said, that first task, I'll dive in a little bit more here. If you want to go to the next slide, Mark.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. The task 1 is really about, task 1 and 2 is really about starting that conversation about waste reduction. So when we're talking about products, how do we actually stop the waste from occurring by reducing and redesigning the packaging first off? Things that we're going to be focusing on are creating better and more safe products from the get-go. So when we talk about life cycle, which Mark mentioned, from the actual production, looking at how is this designed, how much energy are we using when we're producing this item, what is it made of, and making sure that potential health impacts of that product, all of the things that we think about in safe design, and not just where it will end up, which of course is critical. We want to make sure that this product gets reused, and we are designing for that purpose. You see extended producer responsibility. So when we think about product stewardship, that is really looking at the role and responsibility that the person that is making this item has. And we are moving very quickly in this state to think about how manufacturers can kind of build that into the production. And we've had industry here in New York that is starting. We have some legislation, as many of you know, in items like paint, where the actual producer producer of this item is now going to be responsible for where it ends up. So that task one task 1 and 2 will really be talking about expanding the idea of extender producer responsibility. And we have incredible partners, as I mentioned, Mark, working in this field for a while. We already have folks that are doing this in New York State. The New York State Product Stewardship Council is someone that we're going to be working with in that task, in that first task, and many of their partners will help us really get to a model that is going to be successful. Before we do any of that, which we know from being working with students and with our research team in sustainability, you have to start knowing what the actual problem is. So one of the other challenges of this project across the board for all of the tasks will really be understanding the waste stream in a way that we haven't yet. So if you think about where that waste is showing up, Mark, we know that municipalities are often charged with taking in recycled materials or taking in waste and figuring out how much of each product is something that many of them may not have the capacity and the funding to do. So the first step of this is really working with not only municipalities, but also our private sector partners. So folks that are in industry and are whether it be the waste hauler or whoever is collecting, the private folks, to be able to make sure that we understand and do a waste characterization really of what is in those what is in our waste stream. So that whole task 1 and task 2 will really be understanding what is there, and you can see it on your screen here. I won't read the whole thing, but all of the questions that are associated with that. So analyzing that data, and ESF obviously will be a huge piece of this research, and the partners that I'll reference at the end of the slide, and making sure that as we share this information with DEC, that we're integrating this data and these potential solutions with potential policy solutions as well.
Yep.
So before I move on, Mark, anything you want to add on task 1 or 2?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
I'm going to go back so you can see the
Great.
overall list.
Great, okay. So Mark mentioned a little bit that market development is going to be critical and developing recycling markets. So recognizing that in order to increase that base number, whether it's 30 to 35% recycling in the state, we really need to come up with innovative approaches. So when we think about new market technologies, when we think about entrepreneurial solutions. So if it's, a small company building a new product, a new gadget, whatever it is, we have such incredible, I call them youth, but young students coming out into and creating new products and incredible solutions. And how do we make sure that we support? Obviously, we're not going to be the ones doing it, but how do we connect with that those economic drivers and connect to markets in a way that will move these technologies faster? How can we help and support that? And the center will be part of that conversation, which we're really excited about. So that'll be task 3. And do you want to add anything?
Well, I was
Mark,
going to
in
say
there?
that,
Yeah.
Again, you brought in life cycle. I talked about highest and best use, but glass is an example, and you're going to talk about that in a little bit. But glass is one of those target items that might be easier to deal with locally with cottage industries, maybe the arts sector. So there's an example of the entrepreneurship that you're talking about.
Exactly. There's a number of different opportunities, and a lot of them, there's been some great movement on there. So just kind of back to the point of having, and I don't think I articulated this clearly, but the center really being a convener and a collector of that information. So if there has been work in that glass market, how do we connect all of those pieces? So to move on to task 4, Mark mentioned the recycling, that the reason this came to us was really the challenges that we're being faced with recycling. And that task 4 isn't just focused on recycling, it's really about outreach and education. So with all of these pieces of the center, how are we communicating out into the public? So when Mark referenced the fact that people don't necessarily think about how when they're throwing something to the curb or they're recycling, there's something called wish cycling, where you're hoping for the best, but you probably, the majority of people, unless you're people like you and I, they don't think about it again. It's gone, and sometimes it may have harmed the process at the tail end, but they will never most likely know or really pay attention. So really, how do we engage the residents and consumers in a way that we haven't, and how do we make it easier for people? Because you talked about convenience, Mark. People are busy. They have so much on their plates, particularly this last year, and they don't want to have to go to their county's website and have to search for an hour if they're motivated to do so. To search for an hour for the answer. It should not be complicated. Unfortunately, it is complicated at this point. So we really want to think about how we're messaging to the public, how we can make it easier on the tail end with the systems that we have now. But then again, to go back to that bigger system, how do we design for the future, and how do we design and communicate for the future in a way that's going to be easy for folks? And your point in the beginning about environmental justice, making sure that we're thinking through an equity lens and access, and making sure that it's equal for everyone and easy for everyone. So that's really kind of the broad stroke of Task 4 is how we're engaging in the community and talking about these issues. But very specifically, as you can see on the slide, there's a number of very specific tasks. And I came on board here, as we've already said, this is my third week, and this is really where an incredible amount of work has already been done in this last year. So I do want to highlight and promote and do a little plug too of the amount of work that has already occurred with Recycle New York. So that was something that for the last year and a half, Syracuse University, our partners at the Center for Sustainable Community Solutions, have done an incredible amount of work with the state, with DEC already, to talk about opportunities that already existed to share messaging. So thinking about knowing your local program and how do I recycle, they created a tool for that. And we are excited to launch that website. Will be launched Earth Day coming up next month. You don't need to cross your fingers.
Yeah,
it's going to happen now.
It's going to happen, right?
And I will just do a little plug. We will be having a show next week on ESF Connected to talk more in depth about Recycle Right. So I won't spend more time talking about the actual program today. We'll have a representative from DEC and from Syracuse diving into that tool and the work that they've done. So again, part of this effort with the center, when we talk about engaging in the community, myself and Mark will be able to kind of go, once it's safe to do so, go and share what's happening across the state, connect with partners in all of the sectors really, and really elevate the work of the center here, but really use conferences and trade shows and webinars to get that message out. Anything else on task?
I just want to reflect. You got me thinking about this whole convenience thing, which I've thought about for decades. For many years, I fought that we need to make things convenient. I fought against that. Like, people have to have an obligation to do the right thing. They have to have responsibility. But I'm with you, and I'd ask people who are listening in maybe to give some ideas in the chat box. How do we balance the fact that indeed, let's face the facts, we want convenience, with on the other end of the spectrum, we need to also take responsibility. So there are some places around the world, and people who have traveled know this, that you still have to sort out your materials into 7, 8, maybe even 9 different buckets.
Right.
Sorted right out into all the various commodities, versus what we have in the United States primarily, which is the single stream system or dual stream. But the single stream is where all the recyclables go into one bucket, which is actually contaminating paper and having some other problems. So, but what's the happy medium, and how do we create a system that works but yet still feeds into the fact that we want things to be convenient? It's an open-ended question. I don't have an answer on it, but be interested if people have some ideas, because it's really about how we educate.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and we've seen that even in New York State, Mark, with single stream versus there was a couple of counties that are still dual stream, right? And they had some opportunities there because they did not have the contamination issues with glass. We were talking about glass opportunities, and so their glass was clean and could be utilized for additional projects and wasn't necessarily going for landfill cover or something like that. They could utilize it on their roadways with DOT and use that crushed glass for other items as well. So it's an incredible point.
And I just want to make one Syracuse Syracuse Center for Sustainable Community Solutions.
There's
too many, right?
Yep.
Tongue-tying. It's led by a bunch of ESF alumna.
Yeah.
So that's also good. And this update we're going to give you next week on the Recycle Right campaign is going to be really cool. I mean, we pretty much we pretty much are controlling this, so the DEC is really interested
Yeah.
in this and happy. So, yep.
And
that's
I
it.
hear that the DEC representative has an ESF connection as well.
Aha! Yep, we're everywhere.
So those as I mentioned, those tasks, those 1 through 4, really those tasks are going to be led by the center, and these last 2 are really focused and research based. So they have been embedded in some of the staff research that's already happened here at ESF Task 5, looking at the better management of recycled fibrous paper material. So things that have not been able to be composted well up until this point. And so there's our colleague and part of the center, Doug Daly, who's an associate professor and director, is really leading this effort with 2 incredible ESF students. And I'm sure as we grow, he'll be including more students along in that effort. And so what he will be doing, and one of these things is already done, he's completed the literature review, looking at, the first thing, as we say, is wanting to know what's already been out there in terms of compost and what has happened in this field in terms of recycling this material. So they've completed that piece, and the next piece was reaching out to municipalities. Again, we need to understand what municipalities are doing, how are they taking care of this material, how much material is there. So they're engaging in that survey process right now, particularly to those material recovery facilities, or MRFs as we call them, and to the municipalities. So these trials and the compost research will happen right here, looking at different types of cardboard composting, looking at things that often trip up these materials, like a coating. So when looking at how do we compost them, can we compost them, how do we do it efficiently? And then once we have some of those answers, again, it goes back to that center to say, look, we have some solutions, we have some folks that are doing this, let's start utilizing this, let's implement these solutions. So again, just an incredible opportunity for learning for the students, but also applying that research right away. So super excited about that. Do you want to mention more on that task, Mark?
Just to plug Dr. Daly,
Yeah.
again, he's a co-PI on this project, and I think this is another example, and you're going to go through it with Task 6, about relating to how the grant is helping to support faculty and students at all levels here. Yeah. And again, we appreciate the DEC's assistance with that. But Doug has been a major leader in this whole center up to this point, and will be continuing.
Yeah, and we certainly will be utilizing him more moving forward. I know I will be. So, and we can move to the next task, which is, again, another just incredibly exciting research opportunity, and the center will go to fund another effort, which, again, we're looking at that better management of fibrous material. So looking at this product of recycling that hasn't been used in the past because it is difficult. How do we use this? And one of the greatest things here, we have Dr. Bandaru Ramaro. Did I get it? Ramario. So he's a professor here in the paper and bio process engineering department, and he's been doing this work for many years. We're excited to be able to fund him through the center for the work that he is doing with bioplastics. So when we think about bioplastics, and many in the sustainability kind of world, we're really excited about the opportunity for bioplastics and thinking about, okay, well, we need the functionality. Again, it goes back to use. Like, we've gotten so used to using these very convenient plastic water bottles, whatever it is, Tupperware in the kitchen, and yet we know that this has an incredible impact environmentally and economically on the whole cycle in the system. So how do we still get that functionality? And bioplastics for many years have been a great idea and solution, but recognizing that the actual impact right now of one, they haven't been functional enough, but 2, the impact right now in that we're utilizing corn and soybean, canola oil, things that the actual process of creating this material has a significant environmental impact. And we're not solving the problem if the creation of the product still creates incredible GHG emissions and has an impact on climate. So the process is very land intensive. So I won't dive more into the problem of bioplastics, but I will say that we are very excited about the potential of utilizing this waste stream that we have to create a new bioplastic, and to think about the development of a bioplastic and develop one that is used from this waste. So where we could get that, and you'll see on the slide, brewers spent grains. I did see there was already a brewery comment in the chat over here about working with breweries. Somebody is excited about that. But using those spent grains we can use, and potentially then working with the folks in Task 5 and Doug Daly, and looking at how to utilize those waste streams. So again, the end goal is to think about having reductions all the way across, and we will also be looking at the economic benefit of this. There will be some economic analysis in this research as well, Mark.
Yeah, let me just say there, again, here's an example, and Ram, he is fine with us calling him Ram or Dr. Ram.
I tried
Yeah, I
the
know.
whole name.
So Ram has a whole team, and we don't have everybody listed here, and that just gets me thinking about the fact that, you know, the center has really been kind of hitting on, say, 4 out of 8 cylinders for the last year, mainly due to the pandemic, but thankfully and Sue Fassler was really helpful in helping us in an acting project director role, just keep going, but now with Kate here, we hope to hit, you know, full speed. And one of the things we're going to do, and I don't know if you're going to talk about the website, but we're going to have a presence, and we're going to have an org chart,
Yep.
and we're going to have everybody listed. So you'll see everybody in our chemical engineering department now. So that's the current name of the department that's involved, and there's a number of people there. And I hope you're all watching, because there's really great work there. And this is the next generation of bioplastics, and we think there's some really great things already happening here. We have a lot to report on in the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that plug too, Mark. I'll address that in a little bit, but before we go, before we move forward, I do just want to say all of these tests, again, thank you to Sue for keeping it together. Particularly, I'm constantly amazed in this last couple of weeks of how much was able to happen during a national pandemic, and to keep those things moving. And again, it goes to, like Mark said, the number of people behind the scenes helping out and making sure that this was moving along. And so we will serve, as I have mentioned, as the true convener of the work that is being done across the state, and DEC is really relying on us to do that. So internally, the things that you won't see are creating systems. Again, we love systems thinking, so creating systems internally about how do we share this information in the best way possible. Of course, we'll have an outward facing website for the public and sharing information as we have it, but internally, how do we share this best with our partners who are also doing this work? So the exciting thing about this investment is that, and Mark mentioned, this is a 10-year investment that the DEC has made, but it wasn't just us that they invested in. So they have invested other dollars to 3 other universities that I'll talk about now, and that we will be working very closely with. So the 3 DEC other universities that we'll be working with are first University of Buffalo. So Dr. Amit Goyal is currently the director of the UB Renew Institute and a SUNY Distinguished Professor. You'll see they invested they meaning DEC invested $1.9 million, and a number of different things were happening already at UB that they invested in. So, and they're kind of all across the board, you'll see, but some of the things, looking at plastics again, and the recycling market there, and then that last bullet, we have already utilized some of the information that's coming out of the behavioral science unit. So again, when we're talking about outreach and education, what do people know about recycling? What do people know about waste, and how can we elevate and not only the message that we're sharing, how we share it as well. So we're really utilizing a lot of the research that will come from Buffalo, and they're looking at specifics in terms of sorting technologies, and again, looking at the cost and the benefits of improving that infrastructure. So when we talk about the challenges of recycling, one of the things we didn't get to, there we could go all day, but you know, the actual infrastructure issues. So looking at the actual equipment that many municipalities are saying they need, you know, investments in. So whether it's items that are breaking because of glass or whatever it may be, how do we invest, and how do we get the most out of our money when we invest? So they'll be looking at those items. The next DEC grantee that we will be working with is Stony Brook down in Long Island. David Tonges is a research associate professor there, and they're doing a large solid waste characterization study. I'm not sure the exact timing, but I know that had been going on, and he'd been working in that field for a long period of time. So looking at, of those items of the recyclables, what are those top items? What can we do kind of easiest, fastest, and again, get the most bang for our bucks, but also in terms of the environmental impact, what will have an incredible environmental impact when looking at the entire waste stream. So they're looking at those items. Again, we talk about circular economy. They'll be looking at case studies, and again, looking at that economic analysis, diving in specifically to the munis and the municipalities in their cost of recycling programs. Yep. And then finally, our partners at Alfred University, when we think about glass, I will give this center has really grown really quickly in terms of the need for looking at that innovation and looking at how do we utilize glass. It has an incredible amount of opportunities. So how do we reduce the glass going to landfills and then improve that glass cutlet? So one of the challenges we already referenced, when it's commingled, when there's contamination, how do we actually get clean glass for reuse? And then again, it's that engagement with the private sector. So clearly we'll be working a lot with the center. Gabrielle Gusted is the dean of the School of Engineering there, and will be leading out of the College of Ceramics there at Alfred University. So we're really excited about all of these partners, and again, working with them and making sure that we're collecting all of their work in these different areas, sharing that and creating the systems internally so that we're sharing that information and working together collaboratively. So we will be doing that. And as Mark said, one of the first priorities for me in my project director role will be working and making sure that we have systems in place. But I will make note of your point, Mark, that we really want, and it's critical to us to have that public-facing website. So we don't have the website to check in yet. Right now, you can go on to ESF and find a little bit about the center, but that is going to be one of our first priorities to make sure that we're sharing updates as we get them.
Yeah, let me just say, if you do a quick calculation there, you're well over $10 million of investment by the state of New York, well over $10 million in this issue. That is substantial. Yeah. And pretty much during a year where things were pretty tough. Yeah. So I give kudos to the state and to the Department of Environmental Conservation for recognizing this and recognizing that the drivers can be the academic institutions behind some of this. So it's pretty substantial. That goes back to your point of how this is unique in the country, or my point. Well, maybe we both made the point, but yes. But yeah, so that's like putting your money where your mouth is, basically. Exactly. So, and we really look forward to working with these people. They've already been doing great work, like you said. Yep.
Yeah, so we are definitely looking forward to that. I'm going to now open it up. I think we have a little bit of time for questions. We're timing this just correctly here, so I'm going to look into the chat here and see if we have any that are coming up. So Mark, I'm going to throw this one to you, okay? How do you get private sector buy-in for extender producer responsibility, i.e. to get them to see the long-term benefits?
Well, I think we have to be careful not to generalize about the entire private sector, because there certainly are people and organizations in the private sector that haven't. And I've certainly been on the other side of the table debating some of those industry sectors, and I'm not going to name them here. But certainly there's some opposition. On the flip side, though, there are numerous examples of private sector companies that are participating. And so one of the groups, Kate kind of talked about it, the New York State Product Stewardship Council, but they're also affiliated with the national, really international, Product Stewardship Institute based in Boston. They've done some great work, so Google them. They have a list of companies there that have been involved in extended producer responsibility, product stewardship. We've looked at countries like Canada and Europe where it's successful. In some places it's not successful. So we're also looking there to see what those lessons are to be learned. So to answer the question directly, let's find where it works and what companies it works in, and then reach out to other companies and other sectors of the private sector to see if we can convince them to move in this direction. So we will be partnering with Product Stewardship Council and Product Stewardship Institute to move this forward. Case in point, I will use one sector, the beverage sector. We know about bottle bills. We have a bottle bill in New York State. In some cases, some beverage companies oppose bottle bills. In Europe, that's not necessarily always the case, the same companies. So we need to find out what's going on there and how can we work with those companies. In fact, we work with a group called the Container Recycling Institute. That's a leader in this area, and I'm sure we'll be working with them with the center too. I didn't mention them to you, Kate, but that's one that we'd like to work with.
Sue did, though. So
Okay, good.
Don't you
good.
worry. She's on it.
Cool.
Great. So just a couple of more quick questions here. How can I, as an alumni, support the work of the center, and how can I get involved? So I can quickly say, as you heard me say, we don't have a website yet or a way to contact us, but our emails will be on and are coming up on the screen here. So certainly, if you're working in the field and want to get involved, that's the easiest way, is to let us know what you're doing and how you'd like to help. Certainly, we'd like to hear from you. Mark, any other ideas?
Well, it kind of goes back to the last question too. I think I should say this. Before, I think it was even publicized that the center existed. Somehow word came out, maybe it was an internal communication. And the first people out of the gate to reach out to us were some companies.
Yeah.
Westrock Company, for instance, here in Central New York, immediately reached out. So I think this question was from an individual who wants to know how they can get involved, and I'll answer that. But there's a lot of ways for people to get involved, and that's one of the things Westrock and some of the other companies that are involved with our chemical engineering department, the Syracuse Pulp and Paper Foundation, for instance. There's a number of companies that are also asking the same question: how can they help support? There's lots of ways that we can help support. I think we should talk about how do we create an army of volunteers, if you will, that are interested in working on this center and these issues with us. There's probably a management challenge there, but I would like to have us be able to open up our arms, and anybody who wants to be involved and help with this, we should figure out a way to do that. So I think there's lots of ways, we just need to flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah, and certainly that is part of, I can add to that, is that a strategy in terms of communication and getting information from all these stakeholders that we're referencing, private, public sector, communities, all of this. We're of course in our research going and doing surveys and reaching out in this engagement way, but when we have more questions for these companies, whether it be Westrock or other folks that want to get involved, it's critical to us and part of my management strategy to really get these folks in a room together and have conversations with stakeholder groups. And DEC has used that model, and we've used that model with Recycle Right. We have over 100 stakeholders that have engaged in the information that we're sharing. So if we're going to propose a strategy or a solution here, a critical part of that is to bring folks to the table, not only so they can share with us and we can learn from them, but again, that engagement with one another and to find out what is happening in the sector. We think because we're so American about competition and that folks don't want to engage with one another that may be in the same sector and competing with one another, but ultimately people show up and want to be engaged and want to help and want to be part of this. So that'll definitely be part of the strategy.
Yeah. And I think we use social media more effectively, and I know you're just starting to get your hands around that, but there might be a way to engage some of our alumni and others through Facebook and so on. But then we might even do something like replicate the program we have here at the college that, again, Sue is helping lead, our Sustainability Champions program, where maybe we think about a way to train a number of people out there in communities across the state. By the way, the DEC is also fine with this becoming a national effort. They certainly want us to help solve the New York State problems first.
Right. Yeah.
But there's no reason we couldn't develop at the appropriate time some kind of training program for people who could work within their own communities and within their own companies on these issues. So that might be another thing.
Exactly. And taking the leader in a sector, the leader in the industry, and utilizing those lessons learned that they went through and sharing those with other folks and bringing them up to speed and doing that sort of training to folks and having the state support that effort is huge. So really excited about that. So just one last question about, looks like we have another one. So I'm going to read this one to you, Mark. What do you envision the best case long-term success of the center will look like? What kind of changes will we be able to point to as products of this initiative? That's a big one.
I'm going to give two answers to this one. It's maybe diving a little bit into the weeds, but it's important. As I said earlier, Kate said it a couple of times, the main reason the DEC wanted to do this, and if you see, for instance, what Alfred is doing as an example, is to help municipalities and others in the state deal with the recycling challenges. That's really an economic challenge right now with recyclables. There are municipalities, some of you may be in municipalities where programs have been shut down or minimized. So a success would be that we've helped address that in the state, that we've helped create new markets. And it doesn't have to be just in New York State. Our primary focus will be New York State, but within this Northeast region, for instance, but helping to address the recycling markets challenge. This isn't a linear thing. We're working on a number of different fronts at the same time, as Kate articulated the 6 activity levels. But on a macro scale, a 30,000-foot level, I would love to see diversion rates across New York State much higher than they are. I would love to see it across the nation. I'd love to see it across the country, the world. But we need to get beyond that 34% recycling rate, and we need to see diversion. We need to see zero waste goals of 90% diversion from landfills and waste-to-energy facilities everywhere. Now, you might think that's pie in the sky. I don't. I think if we really make some substantial changes to how we think about this, that we start designing products for the environment, that we start taking a hard look at the consumptive economy and work at that level, we can, here's a cliche, it can be a huge paradigm shift. So how do we define success? That's another way of defining success. And then I'll just give one more. There's many ways to define success. That we have also created opportunities for researchers and students and others that are affiliated with ESF. And we have that obligation while we're here at the college, so we want to see some successes there too.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I won't add anything else to that in terms of time. We have one quick question. It was specific to recycle right, and I think I can just answer it. I still don't know how to recycle right.
That's good.
Is this campaign actually going to help clear it up for me? So that is our hope. And again, it goes to Mark, and one of our very simple but very difficult goals will be, we know we will have success if that question can be answered, and hopefully the rollout of this website and this information will be the first step of providing that information, making it easier for everybody. So we hope that we will help you there. I'm not sure we did have one more
Can
question.
I just add on that
Yep,
just really
sure.
quickly? I know we're running out of time, but
That's fine.
yeah, that is the question, right? And it's because there's so many different types of programs out there, and there's so many different types of educational programs, and there's so many different types of bins and labels, and you name it. You look at the bottom of a plastic bottle, you see 3 recycling errors, which, by the way, don't necessarily mean anything. That is not a government-regulated symbol. So that's not going to help you either, necessarily. So I think standardization, and if we can help with that, and that's not easy to do, but if we can help standardize in some way the messaging and the programs,
Exactly.
then hopefully that will help people recycle right.
Yeah, exactly, and thank you. So we are going to wrap it up, but that was a great plug for next week again, because as we said a couple of times, March 22nd, ESF Connected again, we're going to be doing a show completely on Recycle Right, which is an initiative of the Center for Sustainable Materials Management. We've hoped you've learned a little bit about that and ESF's path to zero waste today. Thank you, Mark, for your time.
Thank you, Kate.
And thank you for joining us today. We look forward to the next conversation, and we hope everybody has a good rest of their day. Thank you so much.